It is great to be with you this afternoon. I understand I'm the end, so I will be brief so that you can get out of here. I hope it has been a wonderful conference, and just thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. I love seeing so many young faces in the pro-life movement. It's so encouraging to me. I used to be one of those young faces, but I graduated North Texas 20 years ago, and so I'm just so encouraged, though, that this movement is growing stronger and stronger and stronger. I believe that each and every person has the right and the God-given opportunity to choose to be happy. And they have that right because someone chose life for them. I live what I term to be an awesome life. As you can see from the video, I get to do whatever I want to do. I drove here from Dallas-Fort Worth in my van. I will drive it back here in just a few minutes. I have a wife. I have 3 daughters. 10, 6, and 3. It is never dull at my house. I own my own travel agency. As you heard, I lead worship on the weekends, except for today, so that I could be with you today. I live the life I choose to live. And that life has value. Even if very early on, a life doesn't look like it matches what the rest of the world has. We've got to assume that it has value. We've got to assume that that life is worth it because you cannot know what that person's going to accomplish. January of 1980. My mother would tell you that I was the easiest of her 3 pregnancies. They didn't know anything was going to be wrong, anything was going to be different. They didn't do sonograms around that time unless they thought there was a problem. My doctor, her doctor, even let me be born breech. And had it not been for a very heroic move on his part, I would have died, and so would she. But it's what he did after I was born that I think continues today and continues to plague us as a society. You see, after I was born, he gave me a very minimal amount of suction, put me in the corner of the room, and left me to die. He told my parents later that he decided, after looking at me, that if my body was as mangled on the inside as it was on the outside, it's likely that I would be better off dead. I disagreed. When we look at life, what do we see? Do we see what should be? Do you see what's perfect, or do we see potential? Now, my parents never saw me on a sonogram screen. They have been pro-life as long as they have been together, before that even, and so they would have chosen nothing different for me. But in today's day and age, parents who are not pro-life, who maybe not necessarily abortion-minded, are going to get told in that doctor's room, when they see a baby on the sonogram screen with no arms, they're going to be told there's a problem. And it's going to be better off if we just start over. The treatment for an abnormal diagnosis in pregnancy is abortion. Treatment and abortion should never be in the same sentence in our language. But that's what happens. And look, everybody wants a perfect child. I get it. I get it. But what we decide is perfect is very different from what life can be. So, I'm going to talk with you this afternoon about some things that keep me happy, that keep me positive, some things that you'll be able to apply to your life. But throughout it, I want you to hear that life has value and is worth fighting for. And I know that you guys are focusing more on kind of some more end-of-life things, some euthanasia, and I wasn't given that note, so this is going to be a little bit more towards the abortion side of things, but it applies both ways, because life at the end is just as valuable as life at the beginning. Back when I was 3 years old, my parents decided that the way for me to be able to get around better with my friends would be to buy me my first powered wheelchair. You see, doctors told my parents I would never walk. I was taking my first steps at 3 years old, but my friends were all running around playing. So the way to even the playing field was to buy me my first powered wheelchair. Now, let me give you a mental image. The first wheelchair that I had looked nothing like this. This is a very nice wheelchair. I even call it my Rolls Royce of wheelchairs. It has every bell and whistle I need. It is designed for me to be in most of the day, so it's perfect. The first wheelchair that I had when I was 3 years old weighed 400 pounds, could go 10 miles an hour or faster. And again, I was 3. It was not a dangerous situation at all. That first wheelchair, I can remember driving around the church building. My dad's been a minister his whole life, so literally we were in the church building when it was time to unlock the doors and there when it was time to lock them. And I remember playing chase with my friends. And I was the one being chased. Now, this building had been added onto and added onto and added onto, so the Bible classrooms had all kinds of maze-like configuration in the back. And it was perfect for playing chase. You could make turns so fast. I was the one being chased. And I looked over my shoulder to see if they were gaining on me. So when you're driving your car and you go to make a turn, except you look over your shoulder the other way, you know what happens, right? You don't wind up in the lane you're supposed to be in. When you're driving your wheelchair and you look over your shoulder and you go to make a turn down a hallway, you run right through a sheetrock wall. There was a Chet-shaped hole in a door I ran through that. My parents, when I was 11 years old, they decided that it was time to move from Bossier City, Louisiana, where I was born, to Dallas-Fort Worth. And they let me pick the school that I would attend. We looked around at different schools, not only for schools that were physically accessible, but for schools that had attitudes of accessibility. I want to be wanted. I want a school to desire me to be there. So we looked and we finally found one, and I chose the school, and they chose a house down the hill from that school. Now, in comparison of this wheelchair and the old one, this wheelchair has what are called resistance brakes. What I mean by that is, if I were to floor this right now and go as fast as I can, the moment I let go of the control stick, the chair's going to apply the brakes because I'm no longer telling it to go forward. It's much like how a governor works in a car. That first wheelchair that I had nothing like that. In fact, the only way to stop it was to hit a button on the side labeled brakes. And you can guess how often a 6th grade boy hit the button labeled brakes. I didn't even know if it worked or not. And so the longer I went downhill, the more speed my wheelchair would gain. I loved going back and forth to school every day with my friends. They were on their bikes and I was in my wheelchair. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of freedom. Everything was going well until one day a neighbor decided to call my parents. And he said, "I don't mean to be a tattletale," which is baloney. That could have been solved by you not picking up the phone and tattletaling on me. I don't mean to be a tattletale, but I was behind your son. I was in my car, and he was in his wheelchair. We were going down rolling meadows, and I just thought you might want to know I clocked him going 25 miles an hour. My mom hit the roof. "I can't believe you're going that fast. Do you know how dangerous that is?" You know how moms can be. She walked out of the room, and my dad looked at me, and he said, "Awesome." They are a perfect pair. My parents, she always rode the brakes. He always hit the gas. If I had had 2 of him, I'd be dead. So, all right. There's a story that I do not normally tell, but you look like a fun audience. So here we go. Around that same time when we moved into the area, I went to church on a Wednesday night, and I came out. It was around Halloween. And I came out with 2 party invitations. One was to a kid's house, and the other one's to, it's basically a haunted house that the teenagers of the church built in the church building, which is a weird thing, and I'm not even going to get into the theology of that, but just, I know it's weird. They would invite the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders up to play little party games, and then at the end of the night, the teenagers would lead the little kids through the haunted house and scare the living daylights out of them. It was a loving Christian environment. So, I'm new at this point, right? And so I don't have any friends. So I get to the party, and they're playing like party games. And one of them was bobbing for apples. I was like, bobbing for apples? This is how I eat. I don't know why this would be fun for anyone. Like, this is my daily life. And some of you will get that on the way home. Don't worry. It's a slow burn joke. So I'm off to the side, not really paying much attention. And one of the teenagers comes downstairs, and he says, "We have an idea. Will you come upstairs with us?" And now I'm in 6th grade, and a teenager just asked me to go up and be with the teens because they were cool. So I followed him. There were different themed rooms that year in the haunted house. The room they took me to was the surgery room. Oh my gosh, no, it's funny. It's not no. I played along completely. I was not taken advantage of. They told me, so there was a cadaver on the table. It was a high school student, and he had like gummy worms and fake blood and all this kind of stuff. And they told me, get underneath the table, which had a skirt on it, so I couldn't be seen. And when the kids come up and touch the cadaver, I was to jump out and go, "How about they took my arms?" It was too real. About the 3rd child that came in the room and crying, clutching the ground, and refusing to move on, the adults made us stop. I told that joke a few years ago, and this lady approached me afterwards, and she goes, "I was one of those children." She said, "My parents took me to therapy after that." I tell you those stories to say I've had a fun life. I've had a life that I got into just as much trouble as any kid. I have fun in life. I enjoy who I am, and I would not change it for anything. Because this is my life, and it's worth it. So, let me get on to a couple, 3 lessons here that we can take away today as far as keeping up our own positivity and also to help us in the cause that we fight for. And that, number 1, is stop playing the blame game. So, in our country, in the world, how we handle tough situations is to start looking for who's to blame. We start looking up the chain. Who caused this? What law caused this? What legislator caused it? Whatever the case may be. And while we're doing that, we're not focusing on how to fix whatever the situation is. We're not focusing on what to make better. Now, nobody is to blame for the way I look. My parents didn't do anything wrong during the pregnancy. There were no drugs taken. There were no accidents. There's nothing in my genetic code that I can pass on to my own children. It is completely and purely an accident. And I know I'm not going to focus a lot on Christian belief today, but I want you to hear, as a Christian, I believe God's not responsible for this either. God is a God of help, not a God of hurt. He does not visit tragedies on people. If you want to know more about that, I am happy to talk with you about it afterwards. But beyond that, no human is to blame either. Now, would it be permissible in society for me to focus on that, though? Like, I could chase that my whole life. That could be my quest to find out why it happened. And ultimately, 2 things. Number 1, I'd miss out on life. Because I'd be so focused on why. And number 2, and maybe much more importantly, what difference does it make? If on the way home, my doctor called me and said, "I figured it out. We know why you were born this way." Would it change anything about how I live? So why are we so concerned with it? Just to give you an idea, I don't have anything on my right shoulder that would look like an arm. It dead ends on my shoulder. I do have a left stub, I guess. You'll see me gesture with it. The only thing I can figure is I watch you gesture with your hands, so my brain thinks I need to do it over here. But it has a mind of its own, so I don't even know what it's doing. My legs are short because I don't have a femur bone in either leg. I do have a tibia, but no fibula. And when the tibia reaches to my thigh muscle, it dead ends. So it doesn't actually reach my pelvic joint. And so when I stand, and I can for very short periods of time, I stand on muscle mass. There's no skeletal support to hold me up. So that'll give you an idea. It would be very easy for me to wait out life and figure out who did this to me. But ultimately, nobody did. And if I did that, I couldn't change the situation. I couldn't make it better. You heard Edmund say that I went to University of North Texas. I did for my junior and senior year. 2 years before that, though, I went to Tarrant County College. And it was at Tarrant County College that I met a professor. The best way I can say it is she was in the wrong profession. Oh, yeah, see, some of y'all have that professor right now, right? Somebody that hates their job and doesn't want to help students. So it was a community college, and I'm 100% sure of this. They could have told me I could have clept out of this course because I'm really good at math, but nobody did because they want money. And so I took college algebra, and it was in college algebra that I met this professor. The first day of class, she stood up in front of the room and said, "Half of you will fail my class. And if you don't want me to fail you, get out." Like, what? Maybe she's like shaking the class down. Maybe she's getting rid of the ones who are going to sleep through it anyway. I try to give her the benefit of the doubt. A couple days later, it's the day before the first test, she gets up in the front of the room. Again, same thing. "Half of you will fail my test. And if you think you're a part of that half, get out so I don't have to fail you." Next day, I get in the elevator to go up to the classroom, and who would get in the elevator with me but that professor? And the doors close. It's just the two of us. And she says, "Do you think you're ready for my exam?" And no arms, shortened legs, no filter. All right, so that is much as part of the handicap. I'm convinced whatever comes into my brain says right out my mouth. She said, "Are you ready for my exam?" And I said, "I was born ready." Who talks like that? She said, "Well, we'll see." So we go in and I take the test. And I happen to be the first person done. I go up to the front of the room, hand her my paper. I'm on my way out when in a loud voice, she says, "Well, how do you think you did?" And now everybody's looking at me. And my filter failed me again. And I said, "I made 100 on your test." And walked out of the room. And my brain went, "I hope you did." Next day, go into the room. She comes in with our test papers. She comes to my desk first, and I'm not kidding y'all, throws my test at me. It lands on my desk, and the number 100's on the top. She hands back the rest of the test papers, and she excuses herself from the room. Now, I could tell by the look on the faces of the other students in the classroom that her mantra, her prophecy had come true. Half of them had failed. Not because they couldn't do the work, but because she told them they would fail. Quick question, is that my problem? No, I didn't do it. She's a poor teacher. I didn't cause this. It's not my mess. And society's best advice on this is just keep your head down, say nothing. Because if you say something, if you speak up, if you do something about this, it will cost you time, it will cost you effort, it might even cost you money. You will regret getting involved, is what society says. But I wasn't raised like that. I went up to the front of the room and I was like, "Look, I don't know why math comes easy to me, but it does. So let's form a study group and beat her at her own game." I may have allegedly said she needs to be put in her place. I don't know if I said it or not. Definitely said that. Whole class formed a study group. We met once a week. No one failed her class. No one made lower than a C. And she hated us. Like we were her least favorite class. I don't tell you that story to say, "Look what a great person I am. I helped everybody." I tell you that story to say, if I had focused on who was to blame, people would have failed. There were people in there that was a gateway course and that they could not continue in their major. They had tried that course 3 times. I got to believe there are people that have a degree because we formed a study group in college algebra. All because it didn't matter who was to blame. It just mattered how I could fix it and that I could get involved. Does the law allow for ridiculous things like abortions and euthanasia? Yeah. Do I want that changed? Yeah. Does it matter at the moment? No. What matters right now? How I can help people. How I can love on people. How I can reach people's hearts to teach them about life. Because the law changing is just a part of it. And honestly, if we don't get to hearts, the law being changed won't matter. People will find a way around it. We've got to convince people that whatever situation they find themselves in, no matter why they're pregnant with that child that they didn't want, no matter how they got sick at the end of life, whatever the situation is, that's not the important part. The important part is what you do with it right then and there. I like to say that only you can ruin your own day. It's true. I can allow other people to get to me. I can allow their hurt, their hatred to get to me, or I can put up my wall and say, you don't have that right. Number 2, see people and not labels. In the state of Texas, I am labeled as catastrophically handicapped. Whoops. I think that's funny. Because a catastrophe is a hurricane or a tsunami. A catastrophe is not being born without arms. It's inconvenient in times, sure. But here's the deal. With that label, I can get one signature on one form and I can live on welfare for the rest of my life. I'm not saying social programs aren't good. I'm saying for me that's ridiculous. Because what it feels like to me is we gave you that label and that's all we expect out of you. And here's the deal. When you label something, you give yourself permission to do with it whatever you want. I know there's probably medical people in the room and I don't care. I'm going to tell you one of my most hated words in the English language, and I don't care that it's correct for describing what I'm describing. The word is fetus. Why do I hate fetus? Because I believe it is a label to prevent us from thinking it's a baby. I think of the less time we can say the word baby, then the more times we can think of it as just a fetus. Listen to how people use that word on television, in the news, whatever. You will hear it's just a fetus. Now, why do they use that label? Because the moment I label it not a baby, I can do with it whatever I want. It's not a human anymore. We've got to be careful about the labels we throw around. And maybe even if they're well-meaning, because I know that's a medical term, we've got to be careful about how we do that. Same thing applies with medical euthanasia. Heard the term vegetable before? What a horrible way to describe someone. That life still has potential. We don't know. We're not God. Doctors don't know everything. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I want to show you some milestones in pregnancy that proves that this is not a fetus. And before I get too far, that sonogram on the right is not just like some random Google image. That's one of my children. I'm not sure which one. They all look like that at that stage. So 6 weeks, I know that's way, way out there, as early as, 17 days? 22. Okay, I've heard there's all kinds of stuff, but for certain by then. 8 weeks, teeth. That baby doesn't need to eat in there with its teeth, but it's forming them. 11 weeks, eyes and major organs. 16 weeks, hiccups. How adorable is that? I don't even know what hiccups are for now. I can't imagine needing them then. I used to love it when my wife was pregnant and the belly would go, and I'm like, oh, that's so cute. 21 weeks, eyebrows. Now, I mentioned that, and you may say, look, Chet, eyebrows are not important. They're not that important. But listen, you'd look weird without them, right? Now, that list, see if I can get it to go. That list, does that look like something you could label as anything other than a baby? Or as anything other than a human? See, for years, science was not on our side. By that I mean we didn't have enough technology to look inside to see what that baby looked like. Now we do. And the only label that can go on that list is baby. And listen, when it's your own, it's the only word you'll use. I promise. Finally, use what you have. So I could easily whine and complain about what I don't have. And there's a lot. I can't reach things on tall shelves. When I was young, I didn't think I'd be able to drive a car. Technology changed that. Before we had, this is my first daughter. She's 10 now and is a good foot and a half taller than me. So I love this picture. When we were pregnant with Hannah, I had people tell me I wouldn't be able to hold my baby. Seemed to be doing fine there. By the way, other parents, uncles, grandparents, whatever, friends of random children. Wait, no, if you're a friend of a random child, I wouldn't suggest you picking them up and flying them around the room. But people do this, right? Kids love to be flown around the room. Figured out a way. And I got her dressed in a Wonder Woman outfit. My wife's not really thrilled with that part of the picture, but hey. What are you doing with what you have? Because I guarantee you, whatever you've got can be used to serve, can be used to change. So often, though, we let our own roadblocks keep us from being productive. We convince ourselves, I don't have what it takes. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I'm not a good speaker. I don't know everything. I need to study this more. Maybe then I'll be more confident about it. I guarantee you the fastest way to get involved is to start. And you all know this. You're here. This is what you got to teach those around you. To stop letting them be their own roadblocks. I never wanted to do this. I never wanted to speak. I never wanted to be up in front of a crowd of people speaking. It's not because I'm afraid of crowds. And it's not because I'm afraid of public speaking. I think the top 10 things people are most afraid of, number 1 is public speaking. Number 3 is drowning. You'd rather die than trade places with me? Is that what you're telling me right now? It's because for my whole life I've been the guy in the room with no arms. When I was in junior high, I desperately tried to blend in. What a stupid thing, right? I thought that if I got a funny enough sense of humor, if I was likable enough, people just wouldn't see the fact that I didn't have arms. And even into adulthood, I still didn't put myself in a place where I'd be up in front of everybody talking about it, because then I'd go from the guy in the room with no arms to the guy up in front of the room with no arms talking about it. And I certainly didn't want that attention. My dad came to me, this would be over 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and said, I want to write a book about our lives. And I said, absolutely not. Because I know what's going to happen. You're going to write a book about our lives, people are going to read it, and then somebody's going to ask us to get up front and talk about it. And I don't want to do that. Don't call attention to it. I finally started blending in. He did as any good father would. He listened to my complaint, and then he wrote the book anyway. And now I'm so grateful for that book because I mean, let's be honest, life here does not last forever. There will come a time when I don't have him here on earth. And by the way, they're my parents. My parents are here on the second row. I just love that they got to come today. But there will come a time when he's not here. And now I have a book about how much my parents love me. So it's fantastic. But wouldn't you know it, he wrote the book, somebody read it, and here we are on a Wednesday night at a church, up in front talking about it. We give presentations together pretty often, and I do about 90% of the talking now. If you saw the video from that night, I did about 10% of the talking. I did not want to be up there. But I found out after that that through various circumstances, there was a woman there that night whose faith was restored because we got up and talked about what life was like with no arms. And so I made a promise that night to God. I said, use this however you want. Forget my pride. I don't care. Just take it where you want to take it. And I can tell you story after story after story across now 13 years, 12 years of doing this. One in particular that I want to tell you was in Minnesota. I went to Minnesota in January. Don't go to Minnesota in January. That, for a Texas boy, there were like 6-foot snow drifts on the side of the road, and my mind just exploded. I was asked to come and speak at this theater. It was a community theater. It was a gorgeous old theater, and it had been restored, and it was the kind of grand opening, and I was supposed to kind of just be the entertainment for the night. So I did my thing, and afterwards, I often like to hang around, and I will today, because I always like to meet people and answer questions and do whatever I can. And that night, there was a line of people talking to me, and I noticed this one guy, about college age, who was off to the side. And it was obvious he was waiting. He wanted everybody else to be gone before he came and talked to me. So sure enough, the last person leaves, and he walks up, and the first words out of his mouth, he said, "Tonight I'm going to go home and kill myself." I've never had any crisis counseling training. I've never had anybody tell me that before. But we just talked. So it turned out that he had contracted an illness that had robbed his body of adrenaline, and it was going to be a permanent thing. And I never realized what adrenaline, how crucial it is. I'm not nervous up here, but I'm keyed up. And without it, I would have already passed out like 40 minutes ago. And this kid was in a band. It was all he loved to do was play music. And now, even though he wasn't nervous about being in the band, when he was in front of a crowd, within a song, he would pass out, because his body couldn't sustain that kind of excitement. His longtime girlfriend, who he thought was going to be his future wife, left because she didn't want that life. So now he's living with his parents. His love is gone. His future is gone. And he's going to kill himself. So I just started talking about the things he did have. Turns out he loved to write poetry, loved to write songs. I was like, man, that can be done in the privacy of your house without any need for a journal. And then he took off on that, and he goes, yeah, and then I could give it to my band, and they could play it, and I could listen to my music being played. I was like, yeah. And he goes, maybe if the poem is short enough, I could get up and read it at an open mic night. I was like, yeah. He starts taking off on all this stuff. He left with a smile. We didn't keep in touch. I don't even know his name. But I got to believe that he didn't go home and kill himself that night. He had a reason. He had a life that he saw purpose in. Again, I'm not that good. But I could have easily been adamant that night 13 years ago and said, no way am I getting up on stage. And then I wouldn't have been there when that guy needed help. You've got what you need. Your friends have what they need. Maybe they just need some encouragement, or maybe they just need to see themselves differently. But everybody can help in this fight. There's not one person that cannot lend some kind of aid to this. And we need everyone. But beyond that, you can accomplish so much in your life if you'll get out of your own way. I like to joke about the fact that I'm probably the most visibly disabled person in the room. I'm looking around, but for the most part, there's nobody else in here without arms. But every person in here is handicapped. Because most of us have put up a roadblock in our own mind and decided we cannot get past that. And that's as much of a handicap as not having arms, as long as you let it. If you see potential in yourself, see potential in other people. See potential instead of the challenges that are out there. So when I was in high school, I worked at Six Flags. And I worked, when I first got my job there, I went to a job fair, and they had all these different booths set up, and I wanted to be in technical theater. My degree's in radio, and I loved it. I don't use it now, but I loved it, and it was always something that was interesting to me. And so I went up to 16 years old to the person behind the booth at the technical theater department. And I said, I would like to apply. And he looked down at me, and he looked up, and he said, "You can't do this job." I now know I could have sued the daylights out of Six Flags for that statement. Like, there wouldn't be a Six Flags after I'd have been done with them. But people don't tell me that. And so it was just really struck, and I couldn't figure out what to say. And so I just walked away, and across the room there was another booth that said rides and operations. I was like, sure, that sounds less dangerous. Let's go do that. Rides hired me on the spot. And so I soon became the supervisor of a ride called not Flashback, I was Flashback later. It was a ride called the Right Stuff. It was a motion simulator. I think it's still there, but here's the deal. If you work at McDonald's, you don't eat at McDonald's. Same thing applies to Six Flags, y'all. Once you've worked there and seen how they repair stuff. Anyways, so there was a motion simulator there, and it was shared between rides and technical theater. Technical theater would come every morning, and they would thread the projector and get it all ready, and then they would leave, and if we had problems, we would call them. But at any time of the day, if both the supervisor for the ride and the supervisor from technical theater were on site, the supervisor of the ride was senior person on site. Now, most every day, it was a teenager that came and threaded the projector for us. There were two of them, and one day they were both sick. And who was the guy who came? It was that guy who stood behind the table and told me I couldn't do this job. And I was his boss for the day. And I was not nice. Here's the deal. He could only see a challenge. He could only see something that he did not want to get involved with. He did not want to help with. It was all he could see. Instead of the other department who only saw potential. And y'all, I was good at what I did. I was one of the fastest promoted people out there because I cared about what I did. He could have had me in his department. What you want to find out is when you enter the workforce, maybe you're already there, when you become management at some point out there in life, there are people who you will think, there's no way they can do this. And if you allow them the opportunity to show you up on that thought, they may become your most productive employee. They may become the best person you have. And that goes even further to the value of life, because when you're seen on a sonogram screen with no arms, and then 16 years later are running roller coasters at Six Flags, and then 20 years after that are married and have kids, nobody could have seen that potential. But it was there all along. I'm going to give you one little thing here when you're working with people who have disabilities. And I don't have the disability awareness stuff in this talk, but one that I love to tell every crowd I talk to. When you are dealing with someone and you need to know how they're going to accomplish something, it is very easy to ask the question, can you do this? I want you to throw that out. I want you to add a couple words to it at the beginning of that statement. Change it to, show me how you can do this. The latter assumes a positive outcome. It assumes the person can, and now has given them the opportunity to show you. And it's fantastic. And when people use that on me or with me, it's such a wonderful feeling to be, for me to know that they are thinking, yeah, you can do it. Just show me how. Show me how I can adapt this to make it work. But most importantly, use what you have in this fight. Don't ever give up.